Hello everyone, I'm Lori. Welcome to Behavior Education, and this is part 2 of When Simple Suffices. And I'm going to share another really simple behavior with you that's very easy to train, and it's a behavior that personally was life-changing for me and my jungle carpet python Vedra. So let's get right into it, and I will show you what that behavior is. I want to remind you that there are some very simple management tools that everyone can do with their snakes, other reptiles, or any animal. Whether you're an animal trainer or not, your animal is always learning anytime you interact with it, and these are simple things that you can do to make life easier for you and your animal. The first one is training. Training just one very simplistic behavior can change the way that your relationship goes with your snake or other animal. Controlling the environment. So thinking ahead, planning ahead of time, and arranging things in your environment that are going to ultimately make care easier for you and make things less stressful for your animal is exactly what you want to do. And then routine. Routine means that there are certain behaviors you do and certain behaviors that your animal does that are the same all or most of the time, which creates a consistent, clear way for both of you to communicate with each other, and that's going to alleviate stress. I'm going to show you a video here in just a minute of my jungle carpet python Vedra. And as you watch this video, I want you to think about what behaviors you're seeing, what environmental arrangement that you're seeing, and how this helps me complete the task that I need to do. I am going to show you a brief video first with some historical information, and then you're going to see the video where I want you to actually write down or make mental notes about what you're seeing as far as my behavior, the animal's behavior, and the way that the environment is set up. Okay, this is a video of Vedra in her enclosure. And what I need to do, what my mission is for the task that you're about to see in the next video, is I need to remove this water and I need to clean it out. Vedra loves her water. She swims every night, swims. She doesn't just soak in her water. She fits in the water and she swims around, and she has done that since she was a youngster, and she is 3 years old now. And she's around her water quite often. And so my mission is to get her away from her water so that I can remove it from the enclosure, clean it out, replace the dish, and put fresh water in it. And this water dish actually does take up about 1/3 of her enclosure. It's deliberately big enough so that she can swim in it, because that is something that she has shown a preference for. What I also need to be able to do is remove these sliding doors from her enclosure so that I can get that water out. So that's your background information. Now you're going to watch a video, and this video that you're about to see is the one I want you to take mental notes on or write down things that you see in regard to the trained behavior that you're observing. My behavior, the snake's behavior, what the trained behavior is that's happening, and then the environmental arrangement. This is the left side of Vedra's enclosure as you're looking at it, and I'm sliding the door open. Now I just want you to watch what's happening. Remember that my ultimate goal is to get that big water container out of her enclosure so that I can clean it. And I also want to take the doors off of her enclosure because that's how I'm able to get that water container out. So watch what I'm doing, watch what Vedra's doing. Pay attention to how the environment is set up here. Are you guys ready? Let's talk about what you saw in that preceding video. Hopefully you wrote things down or you took mental notes about the things that you saw in regard to my behavior, the snake's behavior, and the environment. You should have noticed successful targeting behavior. The snake perceives a target, the snake followed the target, the snake changed locations, the snake shifted partially out of her enclosure, and the keeper delivered reinforcement. In the environment, You should have noticed that the shift box was placed adjacent to the habitat opening and that the holding location for the snake contained items which took into consideration her natural species typical behaviors. In this case, jungle carpet pythons spend quite a lot of time climbing. They're considered semi-arboreal, and so there were lots of things in the environment you should have noticed that took that into account, including perching and branches. So how was all this helpful? Well, the snake was now out of the way of the water container and mostly out of the enclosure. So just that in itself moved her away from the water, got her to one edge of the enclosure and mostly out of the enclosure so that I could safely get to the water. The snake is mostly out of the enclosure, allowing for the sliding door removal and for the removal and replacement of the water dish. The snake is now occupied eating and in the familiar location where she feels safe. That shift tub was Vedra's quarantine tub when she initially arrived here as a baby, and that has always been her shift tub. It's always been a temporary holding tub and a transport tub. She is very, very comfortable in and familiar with that tub. So she was in a safe spot. She was eating and occupied, and she was out of my way so that I could do everything I needed to do with enclosure maintenance, which meant I could take off the glass doors, I could remove that giant water dish, and then I could put everything back, all while she was comfortable and safe in her holding location. Another thing that hopefully you recognize is that the snake remained adjacent to the habitat. She had the very end of her tail anchored to an enclosure branch, and that made it so much easier to get her to shift back inside of her enclosure when everything was finished. This is Vedra shifting back into her enclosure, so she's eaten. And now what I want her to do is go back into her enclosure because I have finished everything I needed to do. I've replaced the water container and put fresh water in it. I've put the doors back on the enclosure, and now I just need her to go back in for me. And so now you'll see that she is unanchoring her tail from that branch that was inside her enclosure, and she's swapping her tail end for her front end, and now she is climbing back up her branch and shifting herself back into her enclosure. So this whole process happened with no stress to her, and it was very simple for me. She went to her water pretty much right away so that she could check out the fresh water that was in there. And I just have to tell you from a personal perspective, Vedra is one of the first snakes that I got several years ago, and she was extremely fearful and reactive to me and everything in her environment. She was terrified of me. She was terrified of open spaces. She was terrified of coming out of her enclosure. She was terrified if I went into her enclosure. And it was extremely stressful for me as a keeper who adheres to the least intrusive principle to see her in such distress. And training was a way that I was able to go from an animal that hid all the time and was so distressed and frightened at any interaction with me or her environment that she would eliminate, that she would coil, she would exhibit escape and avoidance behaviors, she would exhibit saltatory locomotion at a moment's notice. She's one of the most fearful and reactive snakes that I have ever worked with. And so to get her from that point, what you just saw here is amazing for me. And if Vedra never learned anything else except for just that, except to just target out of her enclosure and back in, that in itself changed her life and my life. And we've since taken her training much further than that. But as you can see, she was very comfortable being out in the open. She was very comfortable with me around her. She was very comfortable targeting and shifting and eating out in the open. And we had very clear communication going on between the two of us. And I'm so thankful that I turned to training in order to solve the fear and reactivity issues that Vedra was having, and that I turned to training as a solution when I had an animal in my care that needed help. Thank you so much for watching. As always, you can reach me through my website at behavioreducation.org, or you can email me at behavioreducationllc@gmail.com. And you can also find me on social media, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, please remember to always be kind and love your animals.